Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anti-Doping Podcast, brought to you by the Partnership for Clean Competition. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and in this episode, we are joined by our guest, Dominic Mueser. Dominic has worked in anti-doping for more than a decade, much of it with Germany's National Anti-Doping Agency, and today he works at Sportradar, where he serves as the global head of anti-doping services. Sportradar primarily collects and analyzes sports data, providing information to everyone from international sports federations to bookmakers. And listeners, today Dominic is joining us to discuss Sportradar's role in the anti-doping space. So Dominic, thank you so much for being here with us today. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you, Marie. And thanks for having me.
Well, we're delighted to have you with us today, and I'm excited to get into the details here. So can you start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your work there at Sportradar?
Yeah, of course. Just starting in the beginning, you already mentioned that I worked for a long time for NADA Germany. But I think I came to anti-doping like more or less everyone else by coincidence or definitely not on purpose. I did sport for my whole life and I was really into it. I love to be competitive and find friendships, so all the good sides in sport. And I started making sport when I was 6 and then went further down the sport road. And at some point I had to decide what's next. And I had to decide like what I want to do. And I started first looking a little bit more into the economics and doing something to get a job after this. And after a while, I realized that's not what I want to do for my whole life. So I studied sports science. I finished in 2007. And then, as I said, by coincidence and with a lot of luck, I just got a job from NADA Germany. And I applied. And I think a week after I had a job in the testing unit and I started talking to athletes and introducing the ADAM system and all of this. So it was a very fast switch, I would say. But the best thing happened in my work life because it was like the next 10, 11 years were quite a journey and very enjoyed having all these conversations with great, passionate people, working for WADA, working for the Council of Europe and other bigger organizations. And it gave me a very, very good overall perspective on the system and on what it is about and what it should be about. And then at the end of 2018, I realized, okay, I spent about 11 years in NADA Germany and I saw a lot of things and I thought there must be more. There must be something you can do to make the system more efficient, to be more inclusive in terms of like including athletes in what we are doing and making their life a little bit easier in these kind of complex worlds. And then Sportradar came up and they asked me if we want to create these kind of new unit. And I was super excited and thought that combining technology with anti-doping and the purpose of anti-doping sounds like a very, very good fit. And that's how we started at Sportradar.
Phenomenal. You mentioned you had this passion for sport when you were young. I have to ask, did you have a favorite sport that you played?
I mean, I made track and field for 15, 20 years. So that's definitely my favorite. I'm a 100-meter runner. So that's my most favorite sport till now, despite all these stories you can tell, especially if you combine it with doping cases. But it's a great sport.
That's awesome. And you mentioned that you sort of got into anti-doping on accident. And I think that is the case for many people. But I think the learning curve can be a little bit steep when you first start. So what was it like to you finding your way when you first started there in anti-doping?
At the beginning, it was overwhelming, having the first job and then directly dive into these kind of very difficult conversations with athletes, explaining a new technical system with atoms. That wasn't an easy task and going from like paper. And I remember I was sitting on the floor with a ton of paper with all these whereabout information and I had to sort it and I have to bring everything together. And that was really overwhelming. I think that's the right word, but it directly led myself to how can we organize this? Because there must be like a more efficient way to do that. And I think that is the right perspective in anti-doping. You have to further develop the system. And that's something we are trying like from the Sportradar perspective and from my role now, that's what I'm trying to bring back a little bit. Not that it's not there, but I think sometimes you need more perspectives and different perspectives and maybe outside the system perspectives. And that brings you to the next level and the next level of anti-doping in this case.
Absolutely. I think people thinking creatively about the problems with different backgrounds and different perspectives can be key to coming up with new solutions. And you mentioned that you got connected to Sportradar in 2018. And I know Sportradar provides sport betting and entertainment information. So how did it start getting involved in this fight for clean sport and anti-doping?
Anti-doping was a result of a longer story. I think from the Sportradar perspective, integrity was always a very, very important topic for Sportradar. And it's in the system, in the Sportradar system for over a decade. And with the anti-match fixing and integrity unit we built it in the past, we did a tremendous job in this area. And we created technical systems to uncover fixed matches and having like these kind of intelligence and investigation capabilities in this area. And this was, from a Sportradar perspective, it was just the next logical step to benefit from these kind of experience and this kind of unique experience, and to combine anti-match fixing, anti-doping, learn from each other and combine it where possible. And especially in combination with the tech capabilities and the infrastructure Sportradar has with more than 500 developers, I think that there are huge opportunities to build up a very, very solid technical system for anti-doping as well.
Absolutely. And I know you've been there with the organization now about 3 years or so, but the organization is actually celebrating its 20-year anniversary this year in 2021. So Dominic, can you maybe give us a little bit of the history and tell us how the organization has grown and evolved over the years?
So the company was founded in 2001, and Sportradar has been at the forefront of the sports data industry over the time. Sports data is what we do, and that's our core, so to say. And we have the largest volume of data in the world, leveraging 20 years of historical sports information. Just as an example, we are collecting more than 1.2 billion data points per year in more than 75 sports.
Oh, wow.
We have all these data, and it's about like combining this data and putting it together for the good in this case, and for anti-doping or for anti-match fixing integrity topics, and use these kind of strength as well. The strategy is always like a Sportradar strategy centered on speed, on accuracy, reliability, scalability. And this is something we have in our genes, like the Sportradar and into the Sportradar infrastructure. So that's an additional part we are benefiting from an anti-doping perspective. And also like the innovation factor. We have an innovation unit, and we are working on new technologies like computer vision, simulated reality. And these are all things we are working on. And especially as an example, computer vision, which is a form of artificial intelligence, which teaches models to interpret and understand the visual world. You can interpret it like, for example, video streams, and then you can calculate performance data. And these are technologies we can use and we can implement in anti-doping areas as well. And I think that's highly beneficial for the market. So this is a bit of a history, what we did, how we were established, and kind of the bridge to the anti-doping topic as well. It is all connected.
Oh, absolutely. And just from a sort of perspective of numbers and sheer presence there, you've expanded now to over 2,300 employees across more than 19 countries. So how does that international span of the organization impact your work?
Honestly, it's fascinating. It's so great to talk to all these different people with unique perspectives, and in a lot of cases with a different cultural background. And based on that, you develop these products. And I think we are coming together as a team, and we do much better than as an individual to work in a combined manner, to use all these perspectives, bring everything together, and then develop great products. And only positive impact, what I experienced from these kind of international work. Of course, it has the challenges we all experienced in the past 1.5 years. And I think for each and every one of us, it was very, very difficult to interact via video and sitting in front of the computer all the time. But you get used to it. And I think as soon as we can travel again and we come together, we will reach the next level. And I think that's something I'm very much looking forward to.
Absolutely. And I'd love to dive into some more of the details of the integrity efforts there. So can you tell us, Dominic, what makes Sportradar's integrity efforts particularly unique?
I think it's a combination of things. On one side, it's the experience in the anti-match fixing field, and a topic which is kind of pressing in the international sports world. And on the other hand, it's the open mindset and exploring new things. And then, of course, the intelligence and investigation capabilities we have and we established and developed over the past years. And I think these kind of package, it's not one thing which is unique. I think it's a package we can bring in, and the combination of things, the partnership structure we already have and established in the integrity field. And I think that's something, if you put it together in the right way, it is highly beneficial and highly effective for the anti-doping field as well. And I think that's something I would describe as unique, working in different areas, combining different areas and looking for synergies in these fields. That's definitely something kind of unique, but also a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And speaking of the synergies, I'd love to talk a little bit more about specifically looking into integrity issues, the different kinds of integrity issues. You've got doping, particularly, that's of interest to us, but also things like match fixing, betting, fraud, other things. So how do these different things connect or intersect within the umbrella that is integrity?
I will give you 2 examples. One thing is the intelligence and investigation capabilities we developed and the techniques we are using and how we put everything together. And I think that's something which is overlapping over and over again. You can see that it's all structural based, and you investigate the different structures behind the athlete and in the athlete's environment. But also from an education perspective, Because what we want to do in education is we want to strengthen athletes to resist negative influences from outside. And that unites us in every single integrity part. That if you reflect on the athlete and what we want to do is exactly that. And it doesn't matter if it's match fixing, if it's doping or other integrity threats, that's the strategy we follow. And I think that's how we can combine these things very effectively and reduce the effort an athlete has to put in, because we can bring everything together and put it in a very straightforward package.
Certainly. We mentioned in the introduction that you are, of course, the global head of anti-doping services. So do you find yourself interacting with people across the whole organization there at Sportradar?
I'm trying to. It's super hard. I mean, as you mentioned, it's a huge organization and I'm still figuring out how to connect with everyone. But especially in our situation, anti-doping services is in a startup situation within a company. And I think it is super important to interact with the different people in the different areas. One of the closest interaction we have with our integrity services and the integrity people in this field, but we're also trying to find the connection with other areas globally to understand better. And as I said, to get different perspectives, to get different cultural knowledge, how to address people in different countries, etc. And that's a huge benefit we have. And people are super interested in what we are doing and what anti-doping means. So it's also like a big educational way we go forward to explain people what it is, what we do, and how we are trying to support the system and how we're trying to bring in, as I said, different perspectives.
Oh, absolutely. And I think data, as we mentioned, is key for Sportradar. So how do you perceive data's role in the fight against anti-doping? I know data is such a broad term, but do you think it's one component? Is it the central component? Is it more of a complementary thing that sort of helps anti-doping efforts? What are your thoughts on this?
My perspective is that it has to be a complement. It is a super complex system we are working in. And there are so many things established for very, very good reasons. Well, we have to learn how everything interacts and how everything can work together in the most effective way. And data can just underline it. It can build facts. It can build the foundation for then doing the next step. Just to give you an example, in terms of performance monitoring, that was one of the areas I explored in the first couple of days when I joined Sportradar. I said, look, we have all these data, and if these are performance data, we have to put it together, and we have to figure out a way to put it in a system where testing can benefit and do their tests based on performance development over years. And I think in this case, data can provide a foundation and orientation for people in the field, but it has to also be seen in combination with all the other good things we already established. So I would see it as a complement, as a solid foundation, and as the way forward. It is a must-have and makes the system in the end more effective.
Definitely. And maybe to help our listeners get a little bit of context here, can you give us some examples? What are the types of data, the type of measure maybe that you're looking at when you're doing your work in anti-doping specifically out of all of the massive amount of data that Sportradar collects?
So I stay with the example of performance monitoring, and then you have to see both the different disciplines. And in some disciplines, for example, reaction time is a data point we would like to evaluate and to get and put into a system. And then you can, if you have different games or different situations and more than one data point, you can analyze the development. And then you can see spikes, for example. Or if you have, like, stay with a 100 meter, that's just time-based. So you have the time over the athlete's career, and you can see the performance development over time. As you can see then performance spikes. And this, in combination with other data points, creates a picture of an athlete. And I think that must be the ultimate goal, to have these foundations to say, okay, to implement smart testing, we need this foundation to execute our testing in the best possible way.
Certainly. And I think when you're faced with just the mountain of data that you have available, it can sort of be overwhelming. And you remarked on previously your frustration, or maybe this just sense of feeling overwhelmed when you've got this pile of data in paper format. So I'd love to talk about digitization and how you think digitization is going to drive anti-doping in the future.
I think it's one of the key elements in anti-doping. And it's not necessarily to develop one system after another. It's more at a starting point to be open-minded and to see what is possible with digitalization and to organize yourself in a better way and to use what's there. I mean, we have an amount of data and open source data in the world, which is enormous, but no human being is able to analyze it by themselves. So we need help for that. We need a technical infrastructure which could do it and which could give us an overview of that and then point out what could be a risk factor in all these huge amount of data we have, and just to be able to focus a little bit more. And in the end, as I said, to be more efficient. So 100%, it is overwhelming if you see all this data out there And you need a way to organize these data, and you need a way to combine it then with the needs of the anti-doping system.
Certainly. So how does Sportradar, I suppose, approach this big problem of organizing and sort of segmenting and making sure that that data is accessible?
First step is we are looking into specific problems. We analyze and we evaluate it, and then we are trying to figure out a solution. And it makes, from my standpoint, as I said, it is an overwhelming amount of data. So to see everything at once makes no sense or very limited sense. So you have to see it one time and then you have to extract a piece of it and say, okay, look, that could be helpful for anti-doping. And that's an area we would like to focus on. And that's how, for example, the athlete performance monitoring idea came up and the concept came up. Or then another issue, which is not directly related to data, is the remote testing, but it's setting the focus and then moving step by step forward. And I think that's a strategy we take here, because if you see everything at once and if you see, for example, these kind of huge infrastructure and what Sportradar is doing in other areas, it is overwhelming, I can tell you. And it sometimes leads to little panic attacks. And for that, it's good to calm down a little bit. And people who know me know that I'm a very impatient person. And sometimes you just want to move forward and then you have to stop yourself and say, look, we have to set the focus and this is the right thing now to do. And this is the right thing to introduce to the anti-doping world. And then we can see how they react and how they can integrate it into their work. And that takes a while. And that's something we learned in the past, that we need a clear strategy forward and we need good partnerships and good relationships to anti-doping organizations and other people, to the athletes in particular, to include them into the project development and getting their perspective as well. And this is something we are currently building up.
Wonderful. Now, you touched on the remote testing aspects that Sportradar is involved in. So can you tell us a little bit more about this part of the organization?
We had this idea in the beginning of 2019. We said, okay, this is something which could be beneficial for the anti-doping community and has to be seen as an additional layer and as a complement to the current system, but it could give more flexibility and it could make things easier. And then everything got more relevant when the pandemic hit and put all of us in this kind of very challenging position. So we started developing the remote testing system in September last year, and we launched it last week. It's based on a highly secure system, based on blockchain technology and integrated video technology. Our main focus is on security, and it enables anti-doping organizations to proceed remotely with the doping test and going step by step through it with the athlete together, using new innovative test methods like dry blood spot, like exhaled breath as a complete new method. And we included both. It is able to do testing as well, but it's mainly focused on these kind of very, very new and innovative methods to do the testing. In the end, it is about more flexibility. It is about cost saving. I mean, it's a huge investment doing these kind of tests. And in this amount of numbers we are talking, it's a high amount of money which is invested into testing. And I think if we can figure out a way to reduce these tests, to make us a little bit more flexible and to lift the level playing field a little bit, then I think we should think about these systems as well. And I hope we were able to explain it in the right way and bring it to the people that they are actively thinking about it.
Certainly, and you described some of the benefits and the areas of expertise that you have there at Sportradar. But what do you think your technology can do for athletes who want clean sport, if someone were to ask you for sort of the summary or the bullet points?
First, our technology and what we do is a tool which can be used by the system and by anti-doping organizations and others. That's how we see it. And we are trying to make the system and the tools as effective as possible. And we are trying to have a positive influence on the system. And for athletes, first thing is it can bring in, from the remote testing perspective, for example, it can bring in more transparency in the testing process. That's definitely something athletes can benefit from. And it lifts the level playing field as well, because nowadays are much more flexible to test athletes all over the world at any time. And it's low cost, so even smaller nodos can use it and they can test athletes as well. So you can be sure that athletes got tested before a bigger event, a bigger competition. And right now, I think that's one of the pain points for athletes. They don't know if athletes got tested, or they know that they never got tested before. And this is not fair. So I think we can use technology to address these kind of issues and to balance the level playing fields over time. And I think this kind of technology is one piece in the puzzle.
Definitely. And do you think that knowing that this performance monitoring aspect is happening, or that there's potential for it to happen, are you hearing from athletes that this might be a deterring effect?
Not yet, but I think you have to go into discussions with athletes, but also with others, because of course there are several questions coming up if we're talking about performance monitoring, collecting data, etc. So I think that's something we have to address actively. We have to have clear procedures in place, like retention dates, etc., etc. So this has to be included in our system, or is already included in our system. And from a Sportradar perspective, it's not the goal to collect as many data as possible. We want to collect the data necessary to make the system more effective. And that's the main goal. And that's the main reason we develop these kind of systems.
So I'd love to break it down and maybe walk through step by step. So Dominic, can you give us a concrete example of how Sportradar can help detect and maybe investigate anti-doping rule violations? And this could either be an actual case that you've worked on or just a hypothetical scenario if you want to protect privacy.
Maybe it makes sense to give you two examples because there are two main areas from an investigative point of view we are working in. Is the one is more human driven and the other one is more open source driven. So from a human perspective, there was an athlete tested positive for prohibited substances and claimed that the partner had purposefully contaminated the supplement, and that had the consequence that they got separated and the whole life was kind of destroyed. And our I&I department just got the case took over, and they conducted covered surveillance of the athlete over a number of days and was able to provide photographic and video evidence that the couple was not separated, and it appeared that they are still in a relationship, in a close relationship. So this is one example, and that's something we handed over to the anti-doping organization to take then the next steps. The other one is more, as I said, from an open source perspective, and that was an Instagram page which was identified advertising the sale of prohibited substances, and the analysis of the page, which we were able to identify that the page was linked to another Facebook page of a former athlete who turned into a coach, and there was a phone number, and this phone number was associated with the Instagram page and also associated to another former athlete and currently a senior member of the regional sports. So people from the sport world were involved in advertising these kind of prohibited substances. And this was then proceeded in the same way. So we handed over the information to the anti-doping organization and they proceeded there as well. So these are two examples we did from an investigative point of view in the past 2 years.
Oh, very interesting. And I know so far we've touched on the remote testing, the athlete performance monitoring, intelligence investigation, but I don't want to neglect the fourth pillar there, education. I'd love to touch on this as well, because we've spoken to a variety of leaders in the field about how education can be really key for doping prevention. So Dominic, can you tell us more about your anti-doping education programs?
We were mainly trying to combine things, combine anti-doping, anti-match fixing education. We have the same goal. We have a united goal to strengthen athletes. And I think in terms of values-based education, that's something we have to actively implement into our education capabilities globally. That it's much more than teaching or forwarding information and saying, okay, that's what we have to be aware of. And that's something you have to know. And that's what you can do. And that's what you should do. It's more about figuring out where you are as an athlete, what are scenarios and maybe decision scenarios you will face in your career. And in this perspective, implement then technology as well. So these kind of decision-making processes can be supported by technology. For example, a virtual reality scenario where athletes experience more realistic what it is to be in this kind of dilemma situation, what it is to sit there in the press conference and say, yes, I cheated and I took this substance, what it is to address this to your parents and explain them why you did it. And I think that leads to more interaction and to an active participation. And I think that's something we are trying to force and we are trying to bring in here as well and guide this and support this from a technology perspective. The other thing what we have, and I was lucky enough to be at the RAD working group of the International Standard for Education. And one very important pillar is the monitoring of education monitoring. And I think that's something every NATO is doing individually, but this is an area we have to be, I wouldn't necessarily say more effective, but we have to figure out a way how we can really say how successful is education. And that's not the number of workshops we delivered. And that's not the number of brochures we handed out. And that's not the numbers of presents we showed at bigger competitions. It's about the learning outcome an athlete has. And I think that's something that technology can come in as well with a participation model. So let athletes being part of planning these kind of workshops, for example, let athletes being part of setting the agenda. And then follow up with athletes, like ask them questions after a while, after 3 months, 6 months, and after a year, and see like what they learned and what they memorized in the end and what they integrated in their life. And I think this is something we have to introduce and we should do. From a technology perspective, it's definitely possible to do this. And I think that's highly beneficial to guide education, to make education more effective. Again, to save costs here as well, and to figure out what are the most beneficial settings for athletes to learn. And as soon as we have that, I think education is the key component in the fight against doping.
Definitely. And Dominic, I love this idea of making the lesson something that athletes are really experiencing. They're not just reading, they're not just memorizing, they're actually sort of feeling like they're there in the moment. So have you gotten feedback yet from athletes about their participating in these sort of virtual reality simulations or just the idea of them?
They are fascinated on the idea. Always when I talk about that with athletes, but also with colleagues in the field. And I think that's definitely something we should explore further. The thing is here, and it's similar to other technology developments, it's the investment you have to take. And I think that's something we can step in because that's something we can support, we can push forward, and we can provide. And if we split costs in the end, it definitely makes sense because it's cost saving and it has a huge effect on the athletes in the end. So we're trying to stay in touch with the people in the field to learn more what the needs are. Virtual reality, it is already there. I know that a couple of my former colleagues worked on that. They introduced virtual reality scenarios already. And I think that alone is a big step forward. Now we have to make it accessible for more athletes because I think everyone should benefit from this kind of technology. And I think we can provide like the developments and further scenarios or whatsoever to make education in the end more enjoyable. Let's turn it that way because there are lots of topics besides these kind of information you provide, which is really interesting to think about. And I think you got fascinating answers from athletes, how they experience and how they see things and what ideas they have and how innovative they can be. But you need a channel for that. And I think that's how the system can benefit from education measures as well. As soon as you have these kind of system and these kind of communication channel between athletes and anti-doping organizations.
Certainly. I think that's really exciting. And I know Sportradar is in the midst of a lot of different exciting projects at the moment. And particularly, you formed a strategic partnership with the Japan Anti-Doping Agency, or JADA, last year in advance of the Tokyo 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games. So I'd love to talk about that for a moment if we can. So Dominic, what has it been like for you working with JADA and helping them prepare for the Games?
I just talked about this kind of cultural exchange, like what you learn from different cultures, different perspectives. And I think that was, in particular here, a huge learning curve where we did. And it was a partnership we formalized to exchange knowledge. That was the foundation to learn more about how it is to be in the position to organize Olympic Games, which is the biggest deal, I think, for anti-doping organizations in the world. And to see like where are areas to support, where are areas we can learn from, maybe for the next Olympics, what can we do, how can we support? And they were already, I mean, when we formalized the partnership, they were already very well equipped and they had a great education program and they had this in place. They had athletes on board. And that this gave us a very, very solid idea, like how anti-doping organizations are dealing with these kind of big events and how they work and what they implement. And I think it was more from a learning perspective, but also from like how to go into the future and what we can do in this preparation period for anti-doping organizations before Olympic Games and how can we support. And that was great. And as I said, the culture experience, these kind of exchange and sharing the different perspectives on what we are doing and what they are doing is quite beneficial for both sides.
Phenomenal. And we mentioned just some of the big issues in anti-doping that Sportradar is working on. And I know making progress often requires investment, as we've alluded to. So Dominic, if we took away all of the barriers that you normally face, whether it's cost, staff, resources, feasibility, whatever it might be, it gave you everything you could dream of. Is there a particular problem in anti-doping that you are most passionate about and would want to solve first?
It's really hard to come down to one point, but I thought about it. I think my answer would be fully independence. I think that's a key element in anti-doping, that we need fully independence from all organizations to have a very, very solid fight against doping and to lift all the barriers we face, all the challenges we face in the structure and the environment we are.
Do you have ideas of how you would go about making it happen?
No, it's getting even more difficult. The foundation is all resources imaginable. I mean, we have the system and it is there for a very good reason. And I think we have to lead people to an open mindset to explore more and to think outside the box and to have a positive influence on this kind of very static system. And I think if we achieve that, it's the first very, very small step. And it has nothing to do with fully independence because that's a completely different issue. But staying in the realistic, what can be achieved is a thing to give people the opportunity to think outside the box and to have ideas and to bring these ideas in. And it's happening. I mean, it's happening all over. And if we combine these strengths in the system and with these kind of phenomenal people in there, and then potentially combine it where possible with our tech perspective, that would be a major step forward. And I'm very keen to explore that and to follow up with people and to go down this road.
I love it. Well, Dominic, we covered a lot of ground today. If our listeners are curious and they want to learn more about you and your work and perhaps Sportradar, what is the best way for them to do so?
There are several ways. One is the website. So you can go to sportradar.com/anti-doping and you can address myself directly. I'm more than happy to talk to everyone and to answer all the questions you have and to showcase what we are doing and to discuss, to learn. So more than happy. So please reach out to myself. You can find me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, you can address me directly over the Sportradar email address. It's d.mueser@sportradar.com. I love to be in interaction and in exchange. And I think that's beneficial. And that's what we need right now to learn more, learn about each other and from our perspective, how we can support in the best possible way.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, definitely check out that website. Get connected with Dominic if you want to chat or if you have questions. And Dominic, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great pleasure as well. And as I said, happy to answer every question that you raised from this conversation.
Phenomenal. Well, thank you again, Dominic. Listeners, it's been great to have you here as well. If you haven't had a chance yet, we would truly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform to share your experience with the show. And we hope you'll join us for our next episode of the Anti-Doping Podcast.